It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Monday, a historic event happened in Washington, D.C., a partnership, if you will, between Microsoft and the AFL-CIO was announced. Historic, the headline read, Labor Tech Partnership announced. And the CEO, the president of Microsoft, Brad Smith, no relations, said people have a fundamental right to organize. And you go, hold on. Are you not the president, the chief cook and bottle washer over there at Microsoft? That's not been the position of many presidents of big corporations for a very long time. Again, my concern level goes up when you start talking about this kind of historic partnership. I'm generally a little bit leery. And what they have struck on is this idea that the workers at Microsoft, the gaming division, the AI division, that they'll have the right to exercise their rights to join and form a union if they so choose. And Microsoft has said that they're not going to coerce, harass, intimidate, fire, do any of the stuff that corporate America usually does. And evidently, the partnership is in how AI is going to be used in the work world. A partnership, if you will, to use AI to make workers' lives easier, not replace them. And if that's what comes out of this, I'm 100% behind it. I think that would be a great thing. Now, Liz Schuler, the head of the AFL-CIO, said of Microsoft that their positioning is, if workers want to organize, we shouldn't stand in their way. She said every company basically fights us when workers want to organize, and that's the reality. Which also on Monday, I find interesting that Shawn Fain, the head of the UAW, the United Auto Workers, their union filed unfair labor practices against Honda in Indiana, against Hyundai in Alabama, and Volkswagen in Tennessee for alleged illegal union busting activities. So while there was organizing campaigns going on in those locations, the companies did what they normally do. They harass, they intimidate, they do all of that stuff because the laws are pathetically weak. Now, I find it interesting that Fain is going in this direction, and it's about damn time, especially because they have launched what is being considered an incredibly unprecedented organizing campaign at 13 automakers. These 13 automakers have about 150,000 employees. If they were to organize all 13 of these automakers, it would double their current membership, which I keep saying we need to be doing. We need to have industries that are unionized, not just one pocket here, one pocket there. Because as I said the other day, when union density goes down, working conditions, standard of living, wages, benefits, all of that stuff goes down with it. So by organizing the entire industry and taking the idea that I can cheat my workers out of wages, taking that out of the equation, that's going to be beneficial for everybody. When it's about quality, when it's about service, when it's about who builds the best mousetrap, that for consumers is the best thing. Not, hey, who was willing to abuse and use their workers most judiciously? Now, I got to tell you, I think Fain is the guy who's, out of all the labor folks that I know, he's on the right path here. He said during a Facebook Live presentation that we're ready to demand our fair share of the pie. And he went on to say, so now the companies are bringing out the stick. Like corporations everywhere, no matter what they tell you, these companies are more than willing to break the law if it means protecting their bottom line from the workers. They'll lie, he said, they'll cheat, they'll steal, they'll intimidate, they'll surveil people, and they'll coerce And then out of the other side of their mouth, they'll tell you, we're a family. And every one of us have heard this story. I'll tell you, in looking at some of the developments going on, I think the new year will be a good one if labor militancy continues, if more labor leaders across this country start looking to the likes of Sean Fain and saying, hey, how do we mobilize, educate, and activate our membership to go into the streets? Because look, it's my belief this agreement with Microsoft doesn't happen without the militancy of workers everywhere. Microsoft doesn't want to soil its bad name with a worse fight. So I see this as one of those moments of going, okay, we'll acquiesce. We'll give you something. The question is what's it going to be? For me, that is yet to be seen, and that's the question. And when we come back, Dave Jamieson's going to be here. Dave's a labor reporter over at Huffington Post. Maybe he's got some thoughts on what this historic agreement is, what it could look like, what it could mean. Also, going to get some thoughts from him on, well, the stories that were big in the labor world this year. Quick break. Right back with Dave Jamieson from Huffington Post. Thanks for tuning in to The Rick Smith Show. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Rick Smith Show, like us on Facebook, Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can find all that and much more at thericksmithshow.com.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the big story today, the AFL-CIO and Microsoft have announced that they've formed a partnership so that they can create what they're saying is an open dialogue to discuss how AI must anticipate the needs of workers. They've also signed what they're calling a historic neutrality agreement with CWA so that the video game workers who are organizing can choose to have a union or not without harassment, without intimidation. This is kind of a big deal, kind of a big thing. And here to share some thoughts on maybe just how big this is and maybe give us some thoughts on what the year looked like in the labor movement. I've asked Dave Jamieson to come talk with us. Dave's a labor reporter over at Huffington Post. You can check out his work at huffpost.com. Dave, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, good to be here.
So what do you make of this story here? The AFL and Microsoft marrying up a little bit, new partnership for open dialogue on AI, and well, the union neutrality agreement. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I'm always a little cautious on these sorts of alliances. Certainly at first, till we see how things play out. The AFL-CIO is calling it historic, and look, dialogue is good. I think neutrality, so workers can not feel coerced when they're making choices on union representation. That's always nice. I think people always justifiably kind of wonder, about this sort of partnership when organized labor is sort of openly embracing a business like Microsoft. And I think people reasonably wonder, does this help promote Microsoft and things of that nature? I'm not going to pass judgment on it yet. We'll kind of see where it goes and whether this discussion they have on AI is truly helpful.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot here, and the devil always in the details. But I'll tell you, one of the things that I've been thinking, and because we've seen a number of these neutrality agreements popping up, is it's telling me that the organizing that's going on, the activity, the militancy that seems to be out there, and look, this year has been, at least in my lifetime, one of the most active labor years that I can recall. So there's part of me that goes, corporate America is a little concerned that this could continue to grow and that this might be a way to go, hey, whoa, whatever you want, we'll tap things down, just go back to normal. Don't go marching in the streets, don't do that stuff. This just seems to be that kind of, tapping down some of the emotion.
Yeah, I think if you want to take a charitable view on Microsoft here, it's that they see what's going on in the broader economy. They've seen a lot of this organizing that's happened, and they see that the general position of corporate America, certainly where new unions are coming, is to fight them, as hard as you can. When you look at Starbucks or Amazon, and maybe they just want to take a different tack. Maybe they think, maybe they think there's no real good in fighting this if this is what our employees want. So maybe we'll go neutral, and maybe we'll get some nice press out of it, which is nice. Not a bad position to take if that's what their read is on things.
No, it's what they're getting. But like I said, this has been in my lifetime, and maybe yours as well, since we're around the same age ish. This has been an incredible year for labor activism. The militancy level has ramped up. We're seeing, lots of victories and lots of activity. Any thoughts on what this year has meant, what it could mean going forward? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think this past year is sort of an extension of 2022, excuse me, in the sort of the big organizing breakthroughs we saw, especially at non-union places, Amazon, Starbucks, REI, all of that. What we saw this year was, I think, legacy unions making huge gains in big contract fights and strikes. Obviously the UAW being the most recent. Teamsters had the big UPS contract, significant raises in these contracts. And of course, the Hollywood strikes that workers by and large felt really delivered with solid contracts. But I kind of see like sort of two storylines going on right now. One where you see unions doing extremely well in these battles in industries where they've been for decades. When we talk about, the UAW and the Teamsters at UPS, whereas the new unions are really in a dogfight right now. I mean, they have won these elections, and I think that excited a lot of people. But I think people are seeing now that that's actually kind of the start of the fight. We've seen in these contract fights so much stalling going on the company's part, a lot of litigation going on, tremendous charges of illegal union busting. Sorry, we got a fire somewhere here going on.
No, it's what I said, Dave. When I had met some Starbucks workers, and they were like, "We've got a union." I go, "Well, yeah, but you don't have a contract," and that's the part that eventually you got to get to, because that's the enforcement, that's the mechanism you need. So yeah, great, we won some fights, but the big fight is getting that first contract, which is why I keep coming back to, while we have all of this stuff going on, we do need major comprehensive labor law reform. To ensure that workers have the option of being able to get that first contract.
Yeah, I think what we're watching is sort of a reminder that while there's been this kind of burst of energy in the labor movement, kind of the underpinnings of the whole game haven't changed. Certainly haven't changed yet when we talk about legally and politically. I mean, the politics have shifted, but there certainly hasn't been the momentous changes that I think would need to happen to see like union density really turn around in this country. So even though there's, I think, a lot of optimism right now, justifiably for unions, I'm really cautious in ever saying that we're witnessing some sort of massive turnaround right now.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting to me, and again, I keep coming back to this, the narrative that's out there. And I think it was Virginia Fox who, not too long ago, none of these people want to work. None of these people want to work. That it was said, I think it was at a hearing about people talking about overtime, which again, very weird. But it's this narrative that you get from the right that, union people are lazy, and this stuff has permeated the mindset of some. And yet, again, I look at the political divide that we're in. Do you have any hope the coming year, since it's a major election year, that this issue is somewhere near the top of the important list?
I think so. One thing you look at is just the popularity of collective bargaining right now. I mean, we've all seen the polls. Unions being at really at a 50-year, 60-year high in terms of the general public's approval. how that really shifts things in the politics of the moment, I don't know. I read a piece over the weekend, with Nikki Haley rising in the GOP presidential polls of really just how viciously anti-union she was in South Carolina. I mean, literally saying we don't want jobs coming down here if they're going to be union jobs. We don't
Yeah.
want to taint the water.
No, I used to play a clip all the time of her. She was talking to Walmart, the Walmart shareholders meeting, and says she wears pointy-toed shoes because she knows where to kick unions
Yeah.
when they want to come to South Carolina. She kicks them where it hurts, she said, with her pointy toes. And you go, look, so basically what you're saying is you're going to continue to have the lowest paid, most abused workforce in the country.
Yeah, and so I sort of wonder, she's still holding to that line in the primary. Have things shifted on the right where you can't do that? Well, I guess not in a primary, certainly not yet. But then you look at Josh Hawley in Missouri and J.D. Vance in Ohio. They went to a UAW picket line. I mean, you got to look at how they vote, right? They probably get an F on the AFL-CIO scorecard or whatever. But there's at least some lip service there, and a certain subset of the Republican Party that's acting that it's concerned about corporate America's power. So there may be a shift in that sense.
Let me ask you about that because, I've said for a very long time, if Republicans were to make that pivot and not be anti-union, not push the whole no rights at work agenda, not destroy unemployment, not destroy. And I know this is one of those things that go, well, that's never going to happen. But if they were able to pull off this pivot, do you see a lot of the labor movement, getting behind them? Do you see that happening potentially?
Well, I mean, a lot of the labor movement, in the sense that we talk about union members, are already behind them. That there's plenty of Republican voters who are actually proud union members. What we haven't seen, I think we've seen like a bit of a rhetorical change, but you got to look at how Republicans vote and what they ultimately do. And it's hard right now to see them, breaking away from, corporate America's positions where it comes to collective bargaining. Pretty much when you talk about any kind of legislation or policy, it's very difficult to see.
No, I'm with you. I say all the time, Republicans hate working people. Look at what they do, not what they say. But you keep hearing the Josh Hawleys of the world. I know he just signed on to a letter for the Teamsters to help revive yellow freight. I know J.D. Vance, like you said, been on a picket line along with Hawley. Marco Rubio attempts to try and wade into those waters a little bit where he can. So it seems like they're testing it. But the reality is, as you point out, their voting record not there. But
I think they also choose which unions, which industries they're going to take those positions in.
Yeah.
I think when you talk about trucking or auto factories, very different from whatever union positions they're going to have when we talk about home care workers and pretty much anything in the service sector.
You're spot on, right? So let me ask you: this year, again, as we said a moment ago, has been just a big year for labor. What stories pop out in your mind for the past year as the big ones?
Well, I think the big ones are obviously the strikes, and for all the caution and cold water I throw on stuff, I think it's undeniable that we saw remarkable strike activity this year. That's proven in the numbers. I mean, more people on strike than in years. You have to go back to the Red State Teacher Revolt to see sort of comparable numbers, and that was a different animal, right? That was concentrated in education, and it was public sector. This is private sector, activism, and I think so. It's a story for a year, but it's also, I think there's almost like a generational story of. I think when it came to UPS and the Teamsters and even Hollywood to a certain degree with those big strikes, there was this sense of years of give backs, years of not getting what we said we wanted, whether we went on strike or came on the brink of a strike, and this time we're going to get it. And I think that was really the sensibility you saw in through all these fights.
Yeah, as good as the UPS contract was, and the UAW contract, as good as they were, I still got people, sending me emails going, we should have either struck or stayed longer to get more. There was that sense there. So it seems like that. Well, this isn't going to solve that. Next contract will be just as interesting.
Yeah, I think whenever people are like, you look back at people who said Sean Fain was asking for the world and this was crazy and these demands were outrageous. Well, obviously they weren't outrageous to GM workers because, damn near half of them, voted it down. So, in a sense, Sean Fain and the bargaining team were really just delivered kind of just enough, to satisfy. Part of that may have been expectation setting, people were really fired up on the picket line, and they had, what was unique was that they made very clear public demands, which obviously we do not often see. And I think that may have impacted, what people expected to get. But, I think what the way he was talking and the positions they took were really, it was a reflection of where membership was at.
No, we walked on the picket line in Toledo and in the Center Line, Michigan, and in Wayne, Michigan. We spent the day with workers in each of those places. And everybody on those picket lines, they knew why they were there. And you, like I, have walked on picket lines for years. It's not hard to find someone who's like, well, I don't really know what's going on. I didn't find one of those people on that UAW picket line who didn't know why they were out there.
No, and I was in Toledo as well, and end up in Detroit, and in Toledo, I talked to people who'd been there forever, and I talked to someone who'd been a temp for literally weeks, but she was all schooled up on it and kind of understood the whole dynamic and had the long view of history because her uncles and aunts had worked in the same plant, and it was not the same Jeep job that it used to be. So it was kind of remarkable to see how everyone had this sort of long-term generational view on the fight that they were undertaking.
Yeah, for me, one of the big things that came out of the UAW contract fight is the beginning of a talk of a 32-hour work week. By putting that on the table, beginning that conversation a little bit. And look, I didn't find anyone on the picket line who believed that they were getting a 32-hour work week, because it was one of those things I brought up to everyone. But I kept saying, this is how we begin getting to that place. And I hearkened back to, learning about the fight for the 8-hour day. And, it was heresy. The workday back then was, sun up to sundown, 6 days a week. Not 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for whatever the heck you want to do. It was you work till you die. So by beginning this conversation for a 32-hour work week, I think kind of an important thing, because we're seeing some companies, moving in that direction already.
Yeah, and you sort of look back at the $15 minimum wage. It's different because we're talking about a wage rate, and there's inflation and things change over time. But it went from very, very quickly from outrageous to very realistic, and then very quickly the de facto position of the Democratic Party, right? Yeah. So I think, once you sort of normalize something like talking about a 32-hour work week, it can move pretty quickly into sort of the mainstream of ideas.
Yeah. It's interesting how that fight for 15 and a union just became fight for 15.
That's right. Yes. Well, it actually started out as it was fight for 15 sort of, and then like with a whisper and a union,
The coming year, last question I've got for you. What are we expecting for the new year? Do you see this wave continuing? What kind of look into your crystal ball? What do you see?
Yeah, I think things will continue a bit like this for a bit. One reason being this is still like a really strong economy. We're at jobs, unemployment is super low. I think like the leverage is still there. It's hard to find scabs right now. If your workers go on strike, it's not easy. And it's I think workers are still to a certain degree holding a lot of cards, whether they want to organize or whether they're pushing for raises or what. Things are cooling a bit, but we might have that soft landing that everyone hoped we had. Whether all of this leads to like long-term systemic changes, that's a whole other question.
we will see what the new year brings us. But Dave, I appreciate you taking some time for us. I wish you the best in the holidays, and I look forward to talking to you again in the new year.
Rick, thanks for having me. Have a great holiday and new year.
You as well, our good friend Dave Jamieson. Make sure you check out the work that he does over at Huffington Post, huffpost.com, the website, if you want to take a look at that. Going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. Thanks for tuning in to The Rick Smith Show. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Rick Smith Show, like us on Facebook, Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can find all that and much more at thericksmithshow.com.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So it's going to be an interesting 2024, and look, you look at the labor militancy that's been going on in this country, the fact that workers have said, hey, enough already. We demand better wages, hours, conditions, and some of the really big organizing that's been going on. And the sad thing is, you know, as Dave and I were discussing, you know, it's one thing to win the election, to get union recognition, to get, you know, to be recognized by the NLRB. It's a whole nother thing to get that first contract. That first contract is, for too many people, way too elusive. And this is why we do need comprehensive labor law reform, to where if it is the worker's choice to join and form a union, this idea of bargaining in good faith, there has to be some teeth in that dog. There has to be some repercussions for companies who have shown us time and time again, look at Starbucks, that they're just never going to sit down and negotiate in good faith. It's never going to happen. They are never going to allow that first contract. And this is where, when Bush, during the Bush years, they came out with the Employee Free Choice Act. This was one of the things in EFCA that I was supportive of. The idea of first contract arbitration, to where both sides, you know, nobody wants a contract imposed on them, but knowing at the end of the road, there has to be something. This is kind of a big deal. And this is why I go back to, we most certainly need to have labor law reform to ensure that when these workers say, hey, we want to join and form a union, that they get a contract, that their effort, their struggle, their sacrifice, all of that stuff is recognized. Seems pretty simple to me. Anyway, if you're watching on our TV program, I appreciate you tuning in. Miss any of the program, make sure you get the podcast wherever you get podcasts. Also, freespeech.org if you miss any portion. Also, for our radio audience, I'll take a quick break right back after these messages. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1947. That was the day that the United Mine Workers leader John L. Lewis wrote the AFL, stating, "We disaffiliate." Lewis had had a stormy history with the American Federation of Labor. He was central to the 1935 split that soon led to the founding of the Congress of Industrial Organizations. By 1942, he led the United Mine Workers out of the CIO. Reasons included disagreements over labor's relationship to President Roosevelt and U.S. entry into World War II and the running of the CIO itself. For a brief time, the United Mine Workers reaffiliated with the AFL. But by the fall of 1947, Lewis found himself in fundamental disagreement with the Federation over its response to the recently passed Taft-Hartley Act. At the October AFL convention, the discussion centered on the signing of anti-communist affidavits as required by Taft-Hartley. Lewis was virtually alone in his refusal to comply with the act. He noted that the act would have been stillborn if labor leaders had stood tall and refused to sign the affidavits. Further, he said, quote, "This act is a trap, a pitfall for organizations of labor. This act was passed to oppress labor, to make difficult its current enterprises for collective bargaining, to make more difficult the securing of new members for this labor movement, without which our movement will become so possessed of inertia that there is no action and growth. In a labor movement where there is no growth, there is no security for its existence, because deterioration sets in and unions, like men, retrograde. Despite the split, the United Mine Workers would remain a powerful, independent union for more than 40 years. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Well, just in time for the holidays, John Oliver did an incredible job on his latest show talking about trains and greed. He talked about deregulation and greed. He talked about the lack of safety on those trains and, of course, greed. Also talked about East Palestine and of course, corporate greed. And it got me thinking, what's going on the ground in East Palestine? Since the corporate media has kind of forgotten about it, I guess we moved on. There are other big stories. Things aren't burning in the night glow. That's why I've asked Chris Albright to come talk with us. Chris is an East Palestine resident and one of the folks having to deal with the aftermath of, what has been our corporate greed. Chris, thanks for taking time for us.
No, I'm glad to be here, man. Glad to be on.
So, right now, what's going on? What's happening on the ground in East Palestine? What are you seeing? How are people holding up since the cameras have gone away, since the coverage has gone away? What's going on?
Well, they're still doing a lot of cleanup. Getting through town looks like some kind of municipal waste type building. There's a whole section of our town which is pretty much barricaded off. You drive through it, which they actually just opened up that road not too long ago at all. The speed limit is 15 miles an hour. You got construction vehicles everywhere. It looks like a war zone is what it looks like right now.
And what's your experience been? How have you been holding up your family? How are the folks in your world hanging up?
We've definitely gone through quite a lot. We were living in a hotel for over 4 months when this first happened, due to medical issues. I was a very, very healthy middle-aged man working a very physical job and developed congestive heart failure, which turned into severe heart failure, which all the specialists I've seen they've not been able to say that it has been caused by the train derailment, but they definitely have not been able to say it hasn't been caused by the train derailment. My one specialist was quoted in the New York Times even as saying that he would be very hard-pressed to say that this wasn't because of the train derailment. I have been fine before that. My one daughter's been getting nosebleeds for whenever we first got back. Every time she stepped in the door, my youngest daughter was getting rashes every time she was in the house. My wife's blood pressure went through the roof. I mean, it actually got to like stroke level on her blood pressure. So we've definitely been dealing with quite a lot.
I can't imagine. And look, as I said, the sad reality is once the flames went away, once the news media went away, people have forgotten. Do you think what's happening, the cleanup, the effort to help folks like you, has it been enough? Is there more happening? What's going on?
No, I definitely don't think it's been enough at all. The cleanup efforts are still ongoing. Some of the things that they've done that I don't know if a lot of the media knows about is they're trying to sell their contaminated wastewater back to us because nobody will take it. Norfolk Southern they decided to dump $25 million into our local park, which was really not needed. Our park was fine. We have a very nice park to be at, to be honest with you, a nice pool, a lot of communities come to it. They're dumping $25 million into that and nothing towards the residents. There's plenty of empty houses around here right now due to people moving away. And with that being said, too, Norfolk did put up a relocation thing for some people to move them away for a little bit, but just in time for right after the holidays, they are now ending that. As of February 9th, they are not paying for any of that anymore either.
So they're putting a little window dressing up by dressing up the park. and basically going, well, our job's done, right?
Exactly it. Yes. They haven't done really a whole lot to really help, the residents out very much. So
No, as I
just like
understand,
you said, window dressing is great.
no, the local economy really took a major hit. Is the local economy, is Main Street coming back? What's the sense there? Because the last time I talked to someone, they said, look, the jobs, kind of disappeared after this. People left. Is the local economy coming back? What are you experiencing?
Being a small town, there's not a whole lot, but it's I think it's coming back a little bit, but I think that's just a lot of that would honestly be due to small town, small roots, people coming back, want to help out their local businesses, want to help everybody out that we possibly can. There have been, a number of businesses that have shut down and that are not going to come back. That's just the reality of it.
And here with the holidays coming up, a lot of people struggling, especially this time of year. If you had the opportunity to tell regulators, Norfolk Southern, someone what needs to be done, what isn't being done right now, and what do you think needs to be done to make sure that the community's left whole, that folks like you are taken care of? What's that pathway forward look like?
Well, first of all, if I had a chance to talk to Norfolk Southern, one of the first things I would tell them would be to get their safety standards under control. What happened here can happen again at any point in time, any other place in this country. We all know we need the railroad. We need the railroad. You got to have this railroad. But the lack of safety and brought on by greed, Norfolk Southern has cut down their job on their people, on how many people are working on their safety campaign and everything, and what they're doing is it shouldn't be allowed. It shouldn't be allowed to be carrying toxic chemicals through town, having what happened here in our town. And I mean, we watched the whole thing from our dining room window. It's catastrophic, and it should never ever happen again.
That's got to be surreal. What let me ask you, what was that experience like when you look out your window and you see what most of us saw on TV as horrible? What did that look like?
I'll tell you about it kind of quickly in a way, but it was on a Friday night. Like I said, our one daughter is a cheerleader. They had a basketball game. After the game, we started hearing sirens and reports of a train accident. We thought, hopefully, nobody leaving the game got hurt. That was our first concern. Right. And then we started hearing other things about it. And my wife let our dog outside, and she could see the fire. And like I said, I started filming it just from right outside my dining window. We could see the whole thing. It was very, you know what? Actually, at the time, it wasn't that worrisome in a way. We just figured a train caught on fire. It happens. Big deal. Then the cops came to the door and told us we had to evacuate. Everybody within a 1 mile radius had to evacuate. And with us, we got 2 dogs, a cat, kids, everything. So I told my wife to take the girls, go away. I'll stay here with the dogs for now. And if it gets really bad, I'll get out. Sunday, the cops came to the door again and said that I had to get out now. If it gets bad, that they're not going to come back. So I had stayed here over the weekend. And as soon as my wife came here to help me get the dogs and everything, she walked in and she's like, "You don't smell that?" I'm like, "Smell what?" Yeah. I was nose blind to it. I didn't smell anything. So it was after that point there. And then the other bad thing with that was on Sunday. They did the burn of the train cars on Monday. By Wednesday, they told us we can come back.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's all fine now. We burned it all up.
Exactly. Everything's great. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have seen the pictures of the death plume that was right above our town. I mean, what they did, in 2 days, they said, "Yeah, go ahead, go back."
And now you've got a new park to show for it.
Exactly. Everything is great. We got a park. So it's all good.
Yeah, it's crazy stuff. So lastly, what would you have, our government regulators do? What's that? Is there something that we can do to help? I guess, that's where my mind is, because I'm a fixer. I want to fix things. I want to make sure, A, we never have this happen again, which is why we need regulation. But two, we got to take care of people who are harmed by this. We cannot continue to allow corporate America to put on the backs of taxpayers and citizens the external costs of their lack of safety or their greed. So what can we do? What should we be doing in that world?
As far as some of that there goes, I would definitely say you got to regulate what goes onto these trains at all times. You have to know, like, when that burn happened, again, small community, we're only 4,500 people here, 4,700 people. The fire chief had no idea what was in those train cars and didn't know what he was, how many were going to be ignited at that point in time. Why didn't he know that? Knowing what's on those train cars, knowing what's being hauled through your town, regulating what's being hauled through towns and things like that, speed limits going through towns, all that stuff needs to be handled and treated differently, because, and I'm sure a lot of people saw that that train was on fire miles before it got to our town. I can't say for sure on this. I'm not a part of Norfolk Southern, but I've heard that, the engineer radioed somebody, they told them, don't worry about it, let's get it to the yard and we'll take care of it there. If that's true or not, I'm not 100% sure. But the fact that, we need to start really regulating what's on these trains and what's going through people's towns. Really needs to be changed.
I'm right there with you. Chris, I appreciate you taking time for us. I wish you the best in this holiday season and the best with your health moving forward. And whatever we can do to help make that happen, I want to know, and I'm sure our listeners do as well. But Chris Albright, I appreciate you taking time for us.
Thank you for having me on here. I appreciate it.
I got to tell you, folks, this is one of those things that's just is angering and frustrating. Now, on Saturday, December 16th, the folks over at the Working People's Podcast, they're going to host a 12-hour live stream fundraiser for the families of East Palestine. We just talked about the train derailment, this community's been devastated, and we're going to find out how you can help. Max Alvarez is the editor-in-chief over at the Real News Network. He's also host of the Working People Podcast, the folks who are going to put on this big event on December the 16th. Max, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, brother. Thank you so much for having me on the show. Love everything you guys do. It's an honor to be on with you.
So on Saturday the 16th, you're going to put together a 12-hour live stream fundraiser to help the folks of East Palestine. We just talked to Chris a second ago. It's fallen out of the mainstream media's attention span. We're not seeing stories coming out of East Palestine. We're not seeing, any of this stuff. So the fact that you're going to highlight this for an entire, 12 hours to get people to have an opportunity to fund a Christmas for these folks, I think is fabulous.
Thanks so much, man. I really appreciate it and appreciate everyone out there for any help you all can provide. If you heard from Chris, you already know everything you need to know here, right? I mean, these folks who did nothing wrong, I want to start there. They were just living their lives in East Palestine, Ohio, and the surrounding areas. And life was as it normally was up until February 3rd of this year, when a Norfolk Southern freight train, as we all know, carrying multiple cars filled with toxic vinyl chloride, derailed in East Palestine. And then 2 days later, the contents of those cars carrying vinyl chloride were released into basically a pit and set on fire, releasing a massive toxic death plume over the surrounding area. And in the 11 or 10 months since then, I mean, these people have had their lives turned upside down. I mean, I came to this story because, like you, I'd been interviewing railroad workers during the high-stakes contract fight last year, and I interviewed engineers, dispatchers, conductors, signal callers, machinists, and all manner of folks who work on the railroads, and all of them warned that something like East Palestine was going to happen if the greedy railroad companies did not change their Wall Street-focused, shareholder dividend maximizing practices that they've been implementing on the rails for years, cutting staff, cutting costs, cutting corners at every single turn. so that they can rake in more profits than they've ever made over recent years. And when you have a part of the supply chain that is this vital, that is this dangerous, that is carrying trains that are getting longer and heavier and piled with more toxic substances, or even substances that we don't even know that they're carrying and that are going through our backyards, and these trains are stopped in the middle of our towns, and our fire engines and ambulances can't get to the destinations they need. We're all paying the price for the railroad's greed, but the people of East Palestine have paid it 10 million times over with what they have been through this year. They have, as you mentioned, largely been abandoned by the politicians in Washington, let alone in their respective states. In Pennsylvania and Ohio, Norfolk Southern has done its best to cover up, any of its own culpability in this and try to just tell people that everything's fine, go back to normal, even as residents like Chris are suffering major health effects. People are getting nosebleeds in their own house. They're getting headaches in their own homes. I've had residents on my show tell me over and over again, I don't know if the grass my kids are playing in is going to give them cancer in 20 years. I don't know if things are actually all right. We're just being told things are all right, even as we can feel the effects that something is not right. And so that's all to say that even as the national media, the politicians who were trying to make hay out of this in the immediate aftermath, and sadly a lot of the public have basically moved on from this story, the nightmare that people in East Palestine are living has not left East Palestine. They are still there. Many of them can't just uproot their lives and move, but they can't sell their homes because after a disaster like this, what's your property going to be worth, right? Folks have roots there. They have lives there. They have jobs there. They are being left in a literal sacrifice zone and told to just fend for themselves. But amidst all of that, the people of East Palestine are still fighting for answers, fighting for accountability, fighting for their families, for their community, and we want to help them however we can. And that is why on my podcast, Working People, this Saturday, December 16th, we are going, my podcast producer, Jules Taylor, and myself are going to be hosting the 12-hour live stream. I'll be sitting right here in the Real News Network studio in Baltimore. It is not a Real News production, but I'll be live streaming for 12 hours here. We're going to be bringing on folks from town and they're going to be holding an in-person party at the same time, with live music, food, and folks can bring, more donations there if they like. But we are really trying to use the occasion to just raise as much money as we can so that we can buy, gift cards for folks in town and disperse as much money as we can to people so that they can actually, after everything that they've been through this year, not have to worry about the mounting costs and stress of the holidays. We want everyone in East Palestine to have the Christmas they deserve. We know that one fundraiser is not going to solve everything. It is a drop in the bucket compared to what these folks really need. But we want to do whatever we can to help them this holiday season and remind them that the country has not forgotten about them and that we have not forgotten about them. We will stand by their side for as long as it takes to get justice.
And where do folks go to participate with this? Where do we tune in?
So you can tune in to the live stream fundraiser on the Working People YouTube channel. You can also go to a fundraising portal that we have created in collaboration with residents in town and a local nonprofit in East Palestine called The Way Station. And a huge thanks to The Way Station and to everyone who's pitching in to help here. Because it's kind of difficult, right? I mean, I've done fundraisers for unions on strike, and there it's a little easier. You donate whatever you raise into the strike fund, right? This is a little different. We don't want to, be gatekeepers here. We don't want to deny anyone the help that they need, and we don't want to touch the money we raise. We just want it to go straight to the Way Station, and we're basically signing up as many residents in town as we can. Very few questions asked, just what's your name, what's your zip code, how many kids you got at home, because we're going to use the number of kids at home to like $50 a gift card goes to, per kid. Sure. We're going to try to basically distribute it as equally as we can then. But that's the deal. So we're getting, if you're living in and around East Palestine right now, There is a sign-up sheet going around. You can also reach out to us at the Working People Podcast if you haven't found it, where you can sign up to be on the list to receive, again, a portion of whatever we raise this Saturday. The sign up ends at the end of the live stream at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on December 6th. And by then, we'll basically say, okay, this many people signed up. We got this many kids to try to get funds to. We raise this much money, split that, like across the board, and have the way station buy the preferred gift cards that folks want, Amazon or Target. We don't care what they buy. We just want them to have a good Christmas. Yeah. And that's basically the idea here. So we're going to have folks from East Palestine on the stream. They're going to be sharing their stories, talking directly to folks watching and listening. We're going to be bringing on journalists, advocates, anyone who has been fighting to keep East Palestine in public eye, fighting to hold Norfolk Southern and our government accountable for what has been done to these people. We're also going to be trying to bring on, friends from around the labor world. And so folks listening might be interested to hear that our very own Rick Smith may be joining us on the stream, which would be amazing, lending his powerful voice to this righteous cause. So we're going to have all kinds of great folks joining the stream. It's going to be fun, it's going to be informative, and it's going to be heartfelt. So let's I know the world's in a really terrible state right now, but this is something we can do to help people in need right now. It's not going to solve everything, like I said, but it will do something, and it does matter. So please, if you're listening to this, reach out to us, watch the live stream on our YouTube channel, the Working People Podcast YouTube channel this Saturday. If you're around East Palestine, you can go to the East Palestine Eagles Club from noon to 10 p.m. on Saturday. That's where the in-person party will be. Let's do whatever we can to give these folks the Christmas that they deserve.
Yeah, and it's an excellent cause. I say all the time, if you want to change the world, start by changing your little piece of it, and this could be a start of that. But here's the thing. I mean, and it's great. I think the work you're doing is fabulous to make sure that kids have an opportunity to have a bright, happy Christmas. But wouldn't it be great to make sure that this doesn't happen again, so that no one has to go through this? So hopefully out of this comes a little more activism, a little bit more interest in regulating these railroads and holding people accountable. Because in talking with Chris Albright a moment ago, it sounds like the railroad has done a nice job putting some window dressing out. They've dressed up the park a little bit. They've done a couple of things, niceties, I guess. There are people still struggling, people still suffering, and the cause still hasn't been solved, because something called precision scheduled railroading is still ruling the day. Because as you pointed out, it's about the greed. It's about squeezing that quarter till the eagle screams.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. Like, I met Chris and his wife Jessica Albright, in fact, when we were invited out to Harvard, of all places, by Professor John Hanson. I want to give a shout out to Professor Hanson and his incredible law students, because they were hosting a like full day teach-in on East Palestine, and they invited me out to do a live interview with the Albrights for my show, right? And so we were doing this interview in front of an auditorium of people, and that is how I started the recording. I said, the February 3rd derailment of the Norfolk Southern train in East Palestine, Ohio, is one of the most significant and devastating industrial accidents in our country's history. And it could literally happen again tomorrow, because we have done nothing to substantively address the root causes that led to this disaster. And what do I mean by that? I mean everything that you and I have been screaming about to anyone who will listen over the past couple of years, right? You cannot have trains that, like I said, are this long, that are carrying this much dangerous material, that have 2 people crews on 3-mile-long trains, and the railroads want to get it down to 1 person on those trains. And it's not just the conductors and the engineers and the train staff that have been cut over the years. Since 2015 alone, all of the rail carriers, not just Norfolk Southern, but the major Class 1 rail carriers, have collectively cut 30% of their combined workforce. This is their practice, is just saw down the workforce to the bone, pile more work onto fewer workers, run your workers into the ground, endanger communities like East Palestine, frustrate and your own clients, the shippers who have to use the railroads, who are getting poorer quality of service, but all the while everyone's mad except the executives and the shareholders. We're all paying the price for this corporate greed. And we saw a little bit of hope in the aftermath of East Palestine. Maybe there was going to be some bipartisan push for the Railroad Safety Act, but that has largely died. It's largely been picked apart and watered down by the railroad lobby. And as the public has continued to forget about East Palestine, the pressure on Washington has lessened. And so we don't even know if that legislative side to hold these companies to account, to regulate them even a little bit more, is even going to happen. But what we can all do is make sure that we don't forget that this is a problem. We don't let the railroad companies forget that we are watching them. I want to give a shout out to Last Week Tonight and John Oliver for doing a segment this week on their HBO show, which has a massive reach on freight rail trains in this country and everything that we're talking about here. So we need to keep this into public consciousness. And we also need to be looking ahead, because last year, when the whole country woke up to the fact that we were nearing a potential railroad strike or a railroad lockout, and everyone was wondering, where did this come from? Well, by that point, we were actually 3 years into contract negotiations between the rail carriers and the 12 craft unions representing over 100,000 workers on the freight rail system. And so no one had been really paying attention to the things that workers had been fighting for at the bargaining table for 3 years. So we are actually now much closer to the next bargaining round than we were the last one. So I want to put, this is the final thing I'll say, and then I promise I'll shut up, is that for everyone who cares about this, 2025 is when the contracts on the railroad are up. The same contract that Scab Joe Biden and both parties in Congress conspired to shove down rail workers' throats against their wishes this time last year. So that contract is going to be up for renegotiation in 2025. And so if we go into those supporting the rail unions, saying like, these are issues that need to be addressed so that workers can implement the kind of safety measures that need to be implemented to prevent catastrophes like East Palestine, so that workers have enough staff so they can do their jobs properly without being exhausted, without and have the sick days that they need to take rest when they are physically unable to do their job, which they didn't have before. All those things are going to be back on the table in 2025. So we can start much farther ahead of the 8 ball here than we did in the last high stakes contract fight.
Well, December 16th, that is the day of the big fundraiser. The folks over at the Working People's Pod are going to be hosting it with folks in East Palestine. You can check out their YouTube page. We'll get links out on social media how you can participate, hopefully donate. I will most certainly be there, Max, if you need me. Anything we can do to help, especially at this time of the year. But good on you for this.
Thank you, brother. Right back at you. Can't wait to see you on Saturday.
Maximilian Alvarez. He is the editor-in-chief over at the Real News Network. Make sure you check out their website, therealnews.com. We'll get links out on social media. Again, December 16th. Mark it on your calendar. The Working People Podcast YouTube channel. That's where they're going to have the 12-hour event. I will be participating. So by all means, tune in, donate. Be part of the solution. Thanks so much for tuning in. Miss any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast. Never miss a second. Also, I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1945. That was the day President Truman appointed a fact-finding panel to investigate the General Motors strike. As many as 320,000 UAW GM workers had been on strike for nearly 3 weeks. They had suffered deep wage cuts, deteriorating working conditions, and endless contract violations during the war. The UAW workers now demanded a 30% wage increase. But President Truman and GM acted as if it was still wartime. Truman ordered a 30-day cooling-off period to be followed by compulsory arbitration. Just 2 days earlier, 10,000 strikers picketed GM, encircling their downtown headquarters for over an hour. The CIO held an emergency conference vowing to continue and spread the strike. CIO President Philip Murray took to the radio in defense of the strike. He noted that corporations had made millions in wartime profits, that wage cuts since VJ Day had been as high as 50%, and denounced Congress for burdensome new tax laws. Murray added that Truman's proposed Fact-Finding Act and other anti-labor laws served to, quote, weaken and ultimately to destroy labor union organizations. Bob Carter, chairman of the AC Sparkplug Strike Committee and chairman of the Greater Flint CIO Council, remarked, "I am against arbitration and will oppose the setting up of fact-finding committees. Anyone acquainted with the labor history of this country knows that those committees are used by political stooges of the corporations to cheat workers out of their just demands." The strike ended in partial victory the following March, with strikers winning a 17.5% raise, just over half their original demand. But UAW members demonstrated their solidarity and their refusal to be cowed into going back to work on the government's terms.